Congress votes to create $40 billion to send to Ukraine. 10 people are killed in a mass shooting in Buffalo. And the Pennsylvania Senate Republican will cover that and more on today's Crisis Weekly Wrap-Up. Today is May 20th, 2022, and I'm Eric Sammons. So one of the big news from this week is the fact that the Senate passed a bill to send $40 billion, $40 billion we do not have, that they will have to create out of thin air, essentially, to Ukraine. Now, of course, I think we should all know by now that when they say this money is going to Ukraine, I highly doubt any actual regular Ukrainians are going to see even a dollar of that or even be helped by a dollar. It's mostly going to go to the military industrial complex, to Washington cronies, to Ukrainian cronies. It's not going to go, most of it's not going to go to what we think it's going to go to. Now, Senator Rand Paul, frankly, I'm just going to start calling him the heroic Senator Rand Paul, did hold this up briefly last week by himself. But finally, eventually the Senate did pass it by a vote of 86-11. So very few people voted against this. The 11 were all Republicans, but it had significant Republican support. Majority Leader Mitch McConnell was a big proponent of it. Minority Leader, I guess. I wanted to call him Majority Leader, but Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, who's also from Kentucky, like Rand Paul, was a big supporter of it. He went over there and did his photo ops over in Ukraine to push for it. And that's not that surprising. He's an establishment Republican. He could care less about fiscal responsibility. He just wants to be acceptable at the Washington cocktail parties. But it was more disappointed Ted Cruz also voted for this package because obviously he's always campaigned and always run on the idea that he's fiscally responsible, fiscally conservative. And the last thing this thing is fiscally responsible. It's frankly, it's insane. It's just an attempt to virtue signal and feel good about ourselves. We don't have the money. Even if this was to be used in the most noble means possible, we simply do not have the money. And so it would be like if I were completely dirt poor, could not support my family, and then I took out a $100,000 loan to help somebody across the world. That would be irresponsible of me because my own kids would need to be supported by me. And that's exactly what's happening here. Other news, big news from the past week was there was a mass shooting in Buffalo, a Buffalo supermarket last week. 10 people were killed and 3 more were wounded. An 18-year-old young man is a suspect. And this was racially motivated, it appears. He was white and he targeted blacks. He specifically went to this supermarket because he knew lots of black people would be there. He drove, I think it was 3 hours to get there. And so this was obviously made the news, big news, because when a white person shoots black people, especially racially motivated, that's always going to make the news much more than if a black person shoots a black person or a black person shoots a white person or anything like that. That's just the way it is. We all know this now. The suspect, the 18-year-old young man, he clearly was disturbed. It says classmates interviewed by the New York Times said he was quiet and rarely attended in-person classes, and he exhibited a range of idiosyncratic behavior, including wearing a hazmat suit to classes. Also said that he found his way to extreme online forums on the anonymous social platform 4chan when he felt bored during the pandemic. And I think this is something that I've not seen mentioned by anybody, but I think by the news stations, but I do think it's something that's an important factor. We know for a fact that lockdowns, the COVID lockdowns, have caused an increase in mental illness particularly among young people. Think about it. You're young, you're vibrant, you want to get out there, you be around your friends like that, and all of a sudden now you're stuck at home. And you're told to fear even going outside. You're told to fear being around your friends. And so many young people have suffered from mental illnesses because of this. We know this is a fact, that there's been an increased mental illness. Well, it's very possible that you could say this is one result of that this young man who's clearly mentally disturbed, perhaps, we don't know whether it would have happened or not if the COVID lockdowns had not happened. But we do know that the lockdowns and everything that went along with the whole COVID regime was particularly difficult on young people and teenagers. And so it said like how this young man, he rarely attended in-person classes. He would stay at home. He stayed on his computer and he'd be on these online forums. Both his parents worked. And I'm not trying to blame his parents or the school or anything like that, but I just say that's not a healthy environment. A young man, he's 18 years old, 17, 16 past couple years, being at home alone in front of his computer, surfing these different forums is not a healthy thing. And so if you look at what the progression of how this young man, what led to him doing this tragic event, I think we should look at that a little more closely. Obviously, the left just wants to use this as a way to tar all conservatives as racist. I saw them immediately blaming Tucker Carlson for this for some reason. But if you look through what the suspect, he was not some conservative. He was not like a follower of Fox News or anything like that, or Tucker Carlson. And so I just think they use this. The left always uses this in order to just push their own policy agenda, their own idea ways to control us and things like that. They won't mention other racially motivated attacks if it's a black person attacking a white person. The fact is, in almost all cases, comes from a case of somebody who's mentally disturbed, some type of broken environment that they're in, and that's what's happening here. They also, the left and the media love to ignore black on black crime. In 2019, 88% of all homicides of black people were committed by black people. 88% of all blacks that were killed in this country in 2019 were killed by fellow black people. And this is just an objective fact. If you look back previous years, it's very similar. It's 90%, 88%, something like that. That's where the majority of black people are how they're being killed. And that's something that has to be addressed. But of course, we just ignore it because it doesn't fit the narrative, because that's all that matters always, is fitting the narrative. Now, as Catholics, we obviously need to pray for these a young man like this, and pray for people in these situations, pray for obviously the victims and their families. But I think we need to look at root causes and not just throw out the racism term and white supremacy, which frankly isn't that big of an issue in this country, but it's made to be one by the left in order to push an agenda. We really need to look at what are the true causes of the mental illness, the mental problems that these young people have that do this. In other news, Oklahoma just recently, their House recently passed a ban on abortion that would essentially make all abortion in Oklahoma illegal. It effectively will end illegal abortions in the state by opening providers and anyone who aids or abets the performance or inducement of abortion, including paying for or reimbursing the cost of an abortion through insurance or otherwise, or even intends to do so, to civil liability. This is it's modeled somewhat after the Texas law, heartbeat law that passed a few months ago. I think it was last year now. And this law is expected to be signed by Governor Kevin Stitt of Oklahoma. And this is wonderful news. This is exactly what we need to do. Make it extremely difficult for a woman to get an abortion, frankly. Do everything we can to make that not happen. So if it means suing the insurance company, suing somebody who drives her to the abortion clinic, suing somebody who pushes her to do it, pays for it, whatever the case may be, make it as hard as possible for a woman to get an abortion. We already know that it's a lie that pro-lifers don't do anything to help women in crisis pregnancies. There's plenty of opportunities available to women who are in crisis pregnancies from pro-lifers. But that's only one part of the puzzle. Another part is making it extremely difficult for a woman to get an abortion. So let's pray that this law passes, that the bill goes through and becomes law in Oklahoma. And it really is a great anticipation of Roe v. Wade hopefully being overturned. There's rumors, there's going to be more decisions released on Monday. So we'll see if that happens. Hopefully other states are going to follow, and we're going to see a flurry of pro-life states that will really enact real laws that actually hinder women from getting abortions. Other big political news in the past week was the Pennsylvania primaries occurred, and particularly the Pennsylvania Republican primary for Senate, with Dr. Oz as the big name. And he's honestly, I barely even know who Dr. Oz is. And I thought, I probably should research before this and make sure I know who he is. And in the end, I thought, I don't really care, actually. What I do know is this, is before he started running as a Republican, he had no history of being conservative, being pro-life or anything like that. However, he did decide to run as a conservative because he knew he'd have to win in the primary. And he was endorsed by Donald Trump back in March or April, I think it was. Now, the race came down to the finish, and it still has not yet been decided. He's running against the three people who did the best were Dr. Oz, David McCormick, and Kathy Barnett. Now, Kathy Barnett came on strong at the end. She's a Black, conservative, pro-life woman. She was conceived and raped herself. She really seemed to be awesome. Now, she's not going to win. She only got, I think, 24% of the vote, whereas Dr. Oz and David McCormick are neck and neck at around 31%, and they have not yet called it for either one. It looks like, I think Dr. Oz is going to win. And a couple things about this. First of all, it seems to me that when I looked into these candidates, both Dave McCormick and Dr. Oz are establishment Republicans. We can't expect anything actually that great from either of them. It's a little bit surprising that Trump decided to endorse Dr. Oz. Maybe I know Trump really does like the big names, the famous and celebrities. So maybe that's the reason. He basically said that Kathy Barnett couldn't win in the general election, which is the standard establishment Republican way to stifle conservatives, to get rid of conservatives, to say they can't win the general election, which of course isn't necessarily, there's no way it's not provable or unprovable beforehand. Also, I noticed that the media is trying to make this like a case of Trump's weakness, that his candidate didn't win overwhelmingly. That's kind of silly, because literally a week before, in the neighboring state of Ohio, Trump's picked candidate did win. J.D. Vance did win here in Ohio. And so which is it? You didn't act like Trump had this great power when his guy won his endorsed guy won in Ohio, but now when his guy in Pennsylvania doesn't do quite as well, now it's a big deal, big story. I don't think so. I personally think that Trump's endorsement definitely matters. It definitely has an impact, but it doesn't necessarily have the quite the impact that he probably thinks it does, or others might think it is. Because Dr. Oz is a bad candidate. I mean, he's just not a good candidate for a conservative to vote for a Trump-loving conservative to vote for. So the fact that Trump endorsed him doesn't also make him a good candidate. I think we saw that here. So it'll be interesting to see what will happen in the general election, depending on if it's Oz or if it's McCormick, what will happen here in November. The final bit of news I want to say is just simply that The Mass of the Ages episode 2 is coming out next week on Ascension Thursday, May 26th. It's going to be released to the public for free on YouTube. And I've seen it. I've been to a screening of it. I think it's excellent. I think also it's more controversial than the first episode. The first episode was much more about like an emotional draw toward the Latin Mass, why people love it. Wasn't intended to be super controversial, but I think we're going to have some controversies around this one. I think that's a good thing, though, because if we're going to have a real discussion within the church about the role of the Latin Mass, the differences between the old Mass and the new Mass, we've got to address the controversial issues. We have to address what actually happened in the 1960s, how the Mass was changed, why it was changed. And that's exactly what this episode does. I encourage everybody to watch it. Tell your friends about it, particularly those who are conservative, good, faithful, Orthodox Catholics who attend only the Novus Ordo. I would particularly encourage you to attend and your friends to watch it, because I think it really does. It will open your eyes to what actually happened, because we really do need to grapple with that issue. We need to address it. And I think episode 2 of Mass of the Ages is a great way to do that. Okay, I think I'm going to wrap it up there. Until next time, everybody, God love you.